Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. Joining me on the DevReady Podcast today, I have Jimmy Lee. Thanks for joining me, Jimmy.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on, and thanks for rescheduling and being able to actually make it today. I will let you introduce yourself because there's no way I will do a good a job as you can.
Yeah, for sure. Bit of background from me. I'm a civil engineer by training who's had too many quarter life crises and various life crises. I just keep switching. But I guess my real career started when I founded my own business in New Zealand where I grew up, and that kind of eventually turned into the largest provider of one-to-one tutoring in New Zealand. But the problem is, I never really made any money, and that's when I started my second career track in product management, and I've been leading product teams in some of Australia's faster growing startups, and I've kind of just been balancing both aspects of that because I really enjoy the tension between startups and scale ups and the act of creation. And yeah, keen to talk and share whatever I can that might be helpful.
So, starting in your first business, you said you've launched one of the largest tutoring businesses. What sort of led you from that business into product management in your second phase?
Back then when I started, either I was just really bad at research, or the tech startup ecosystem was less mature, but I really had no idea what I was doing, right? As most people do. And I think one of the main challenges as a founder is you have imposter syndrome that you're not meant to be there, you're doing things wrong, and you don't get much in the way of validation from a boss. There's no one who can definitively tell you you're doing a good job because you're the only person who can judge that. So I turned to lots of sources of content, and a lot of the stuff I was reading that was really helpful, I realized years later that was actually product management stuff. Really fundamental things like understanding the problems your customers face, really understanding the market, structured thinking, bringing multiple perspectives together. And then after my 5-year journey in my first company called My Tuition, when I was looking towards my next chapter, it was quite a natural transition to do what I had been doing, but in a more formalized role, in a different setting.
So having that focus really allowed you to move to that area.
Yeah, I would say as a founder, you're doing everything, as you know. But there was a big overlap with what I was doing and what people were looking for as a product manager. So it allowed me to make that transition. And that's quite a common one from what I've heard.
Okay. So as part of product manager, what sort of key skills have you sort of picked up along the way, or things that you need to take into mind when you're actually working on a startup? I'm not sure at what phase of the startup you've worked at, whether it's, all right, we've got an idea, where do we go now? Or here's something that's proven, we've got product market fit and we're looking to scale.
Yes, I've worked across that whole spectrum. But why product management is useful is at its core, the role of a product manager is to make sure that the right product gets built. And to do that, you really have to understand why something is important, why you would do one thing over the other, how much of the work do you do now versus later. And it's that thought process, which is really good training. And it's interesting because I'm really bad at that, right? Like as a founder, I was, shiny object syndrome, do everything. I chased an idea 6 months later that, it makes no money, business is in bigger trouble than before, but hey, that was a cool thing to do. But after screwing up enough, I had enough self-awareness to realize, okay, I really need to build this skill. And I know it all in theory, but why don't I, be in an environment where there's a higher standard for this so that I can actually develop it more fully. And that's what led me to my first PM role. So I guess that's the whole tip. If you think you suck at something, go get a job that makes you do that.
It's a good training. Get someone else to pay for your learning and training time, I guess.
For sure.
So in that first role, what sort of really stood out for you about the PM role and understanding how to actually drive product?
The biggest shock I had in my first PM role, this was it's a health tech startup called Mable. You may or may not have heard of it. But the first culture shock, I guess, was that I didn't have absolute authority anymore as a founder. My own startup
Yeah.
had like 20 people, and whatever I said, people would just go with it. But that also meant I could get away with some really bad decisions, and I could just kind of steamroll over people. And um, being in a different environment really helped me build my self-awareness around that, and also made me really think about things like, oh, why should someone listen to me? Why is this a good idea? Why is what I'm saying actually worth listening to? And those are actually really important skills, not just from an influence perspective, but for sharpening your own thinking and making better decisions.
Yeah. So having, what's the right word? It's not more, it's more accountability, less accountability, but more, I'm not sure how to phrase it. It's, yeah, you're not at the top of the tree anymore in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
simple
yeah.
way of saying it.
Yeah. It's a really interesting tension. You have less accountability for the overall survival of the business, but you
Yes.
have more accountability for the ideas and proposals you're bringing forth because they're directly being challenged by everyone else.
Yeah. And then you're solely focusing in that one area. Well, not solely, you're working at a startup, so you're still wearing a few hats, but you're probably doing a few less hats or a
Oh
less
yeah.
focus in some of those other areas because now you've been brought in for a specific role.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember in the first week or so, I was at the office at like 7 p.m. and everyone around me was gone. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, where's everyone gone? I wasn't used to this.
Yep.
Um, And then, when one of my first feature launches, I was running around writing marketing copy. I was preparing scripts for customer support to answer things, and basically everyone was getting annoyed at me because I was telling them how to do their jobs. And that's when it hit me. Oh, this is not my job anymore. That's great. But then, how do I work with these people?
Yep.
Where's the interface? And it really help me also understand the difference between different roles.
I can imagine then that would be a shock because I don't know how I would take that. I've been, like I mentioned earlier at the start of the call, we've been running a business. It's been 16 years now, where I lead most of the tech decisions,
Yeah.
but I also wear a lot of hats. So I drive things and I just take over. That's just sort of the personality I have. So I don't know how I would handle jumping into another environment where what I my decision is not very heavily factored into the actual decision that goes forward.
Yeah. It's interesting for sure. I almost feel like I have a split personality here, in my own startup versus working for someone else.
You'd probably have to have that a little bit and like hide that side a bit as well because you're probably very competitive as the startup, and that's
Yeah.
not. You have a team and you have teamwork, but it's a different culture when you're an employee versus running and owning the business.
Yeah, it's honestly so interesting because whenever I'm working for a founder and I've worked for a fair amount, they, I used to almost find myself getting annoyed with them. Like, oh, why are you telling me to do things? Like, why, this decision is unreasonable. It's, how much disruption this will cause, yada, yada. But then when I'm in my own startup, I'm saying the exact same things, right? I'm on the other side. I'm being annoyed at people. I'm doing the things that I'm getting annoyed at founders for doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's in large part due to the nature of the role of a founder, right? I saw a really great quote the other day. I won't take credit for this, but it was along the lines of companies exist at room temperature, and the role of a founder is to inject heat.
Okay.
And that's been true in my experience. And if you're the founder, you really engage with your own business, and you take pride and ownership with it. You want to inject heat. It's exciting. It's motivating. It's like you want to feel that progress. But if
Hmm.
you're working for someone else, inevitably it's not going to be as high as the founders. So
Yeah.
then you're on the receiving end of that, and it's a little bit of a different dynamic.
Yeah. The thing that sticks to mind for me is something I think Gary Vee said that as a founder, I think you expect everyone to work as hard as you, but they
Mm.
never will. So you have to
Yeah,
learn to live with that.
exactly.
And it's yeah, they're not on the same journey. They're not getting the same reward.
Yeah.
So you can't expect that, which is probably where a bit of that conflict and then the heat boils over a bit too much sometimes is because of that, I think, that understanding.
Yeah. That's right. Um, the good founders I've worked with have all understood that tension. It's uh, just as in you've understood that fact, so you can actually manage it in the healthiest way.
So with that, have you had conflict from the founders where it's constant pivots and change in direction, or have they been a bit more established where they know the game plan and it's very structured towards that path?
Definitely the former, because it's self-selecting, right? Unless you were a bit of a dreamer, a bit of a, at some level a hustler, some level you like chasing shiny new ideas. Unless you had those qualities, you probably wouldn't have started the business in the first place, right?
Yep.
And that attribute is really, really valuable in the startup phase when trying to find product market fit. And it becomes more dangerous in the scale-up phase because you have a whole organization that is less nimble than it was when you're in the startup phase. And my experience in the scale-up phase, which I would define as Series A, Series B, Series C, like that sort of the sort of phase, is founders and the organization trying to come to terms with that change, and that too many pivots and changes actually slow things down rather than speed things up. And that's completely opposite to what it was prior to that, right? Because if you didn't do that at the start, you wouldn't have found product market fit, you wouldn't have survived.
Yep.
It's a really interesting tension to navigate, especially since to my earlier point, I see myself on both sides. And when I have my own business, other people are managing me. I'm like, no, it's fine. We can do it. We can do it. And they're like, no, we can't. And then I'm the one saying to other people, oh no, we can't do it.
Yeah, it's always the sell the feature before you have it problem.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only way to start something, right? Because you're testing what's actually valuable. I'll give an example of what not to do. In my very first startup, we spent an entire year basically building our own internal management system to manage the operations. But with my second startup, we spun up, stuff with off-the-shelf tools within, 2 days, right? Like and it's that's because we gave the right weighting to what was actually important, which is finding out what was valuable to customers, what people would pay for, what solved the real problem, as opposed to trying to build for this imaginary business that doesn't exist yet.
Yep, that's your ambitions are larger than your customer base at that point.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like, oh, this needs to handle like 10,000 users concurrently, but we have 3, so it's not really important.
Yeah, that's a problem for another day. You don't need to. You wouldn't even be able to struggle to test that at this point, with probably the revenue you've got coming in as well, and paying for the amount of service you would need to provision that.
Yeah. I mean, the best guiding principle that I've come across is, if you don't have a customer, your only job is to get one customer that pays you. That's your only job. Nothing else matters.
Yep.
And if you have one customer, then your only job is to get 10 customers, right? You have 10 customers, your only job is to get 100. And at some point, you're like, oh, shit, we can't support 100 customers because our operations are a mess. Okay, that's a good time to start thinking about how you would solve that problem.
Yeah, it's all about customers and making sure that market fits there, because otherwise your business won't survive long enough to do anything, really.
Yeah, what I've learned is it really doesn't matter how messy things are when you finally get to product market fit and you have a scaling business, because by then you can just hire people to sort it out for you, right? Like that's
that's the problem you want to have at that point.
Exactly.
So it's just being able to scale and grow and get through what you need to get through to get to that point. It's not trying to have the best well-oiled machine, because if you're not in the race, there's no point if it's running smoothly. If that makes sense. I think it's about 3 different metaphors I mixed together in one sentence there.
No, I love it. Master narrator. I'd build on that further. I'd say there's no point building a well-oiled machine when you don't even know what the machine is trying to do.
I think that's a problem a lot of startups have, is they have this idea. They think, all right, overnight success, that's going to become the next thing tomorrow. And they haven't even tested, does the product work? Can I actually build this? How long will it actually take? Have I talked to stakeholders or anyone just to see if someone would be interested in using this product outside of friends and family? Because they're just going to say yes regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, oldest mistake in startup land.
Yeah, and then also the first version you release is never going to be what you were expecting it to be, and it's not going to be where it's going to end up. I think there's another saying: if you're not embarrassed by your first version, you haven't built an MVP.
Yeah, yeah. It's even I think depending on your personality type, you have a different relationship with that statement. My co-founder Prosper at ZapCat, she's quite a hustler. She's very good at taking the most efficient path to things. So she's very comfortable with releasing things that how do I say this? Releasing MVPs that Apple wouldn't release, right? Because
Okay.
that's because you don't know how much you're trying to invest. And for me, I'm more of I have a hustler side of me, but I'm probably more naturally a bit of a craftsman, like suits my neurotic personality type. I kind of want to like tinker with things and polish them up, etc. So even knowing that I should be embarrassed, what I'm embarrassed by and what she's embarrassed by are two totally different things, right? So we have to
Okay.
like
Different
find that
standards
balance.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mine is I like to just get things out and test.
Yeah.
So I'll set up a process if I don't like the way something's running, and I'll get the first test. All right, it worked. All right, now I'll hand it over. You fix up the rest of it. But I know this works, so my hands are done. I did my job. It's more almost
Exactly.
like, how fast can you get something? But it's also, there's no such thing as perfect. And a lot of people can get stuck in that tinkering and tweaking phase. And you'll know if you're that kind of person if you're just trying to write, say, a post on LinkedIn or any social media. How long does it take you to try and write that 5-sentence post? If you go back and change words and you're changing things and it's taking you 2-3 hours, you're that kind of person.
Yeah, I feel attacked. Yeah, that's me.
That's my business partner. He just takes forever to like rewrite sentences. He overthinks it on
Yeah,
that sort of stuff. But then, I'm just one take. It's out. It's done. Okay.
yeah.
Move on. What's
That's
the
right.
next thing that we have to do?
That's right. Um, I will say that uh, having your thinking clear as to what you're trying to test with your whatever you're releasing is really important. Because what you don't want is to be tempted to say after you release it that, oh, this thing didn't work. It's because we didn't tinker enough, right? You don't want to feel like it's because it was unfinished.
Hmm.
Um, you want you want that experiment to give a clean result, saying, "Oh, we released it. People don't want it. Now we've learned what they don't want."
Yep.
And so that I guess comes back to the product thinking I was alluding to earlier, where you have to be really clear on why you're doing something and what specific hypothesis you're trying to test, and whether what you've built serves that purpose, even if everything outside of that is really bad.
Yep. Yeah. It's just keeping that hypothesis in mind and understanding, right, this is the goal that we're trying to validate. Do what you can to get to that and understand what pivot you have to make if it doesn't work. The quicker you can do that, the
Exactly.
better you're going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we've been working on an AI consulting product to sort of like replicate our process that we do with clients and designing actual product. And it was built as a tool for myself. And then I just keep adding things that I'm using on a day to day. But then it's like, all right, we can actually sell this in the market. So how do we pair it right back for those people that we're targeting to be able to use it properly without having the 16 years of experience that I have and get there? So there's almost two streams in that path. It's how far do I tinker to make it easier for myself, but then how do I pair it back so there's another version that everyone else can use without getting confused. It's understanding that goal, so then you know, all right, scrap what you're doing because you can do things anyway. It's already saved you enough time, as an example. Now, how do we get it into the hands of other people to save time at scale?
Yeah, and that's really powerful, right? Because that means you understand the problem yourself really deeply. And then you know which 20% of your solution is going to have the most impact for everyone else, and what that what the secret sauce really is.
Yep.
And that's the fruit of your 16 years, right? Because that's earned knowledge that only you have, that other people who haven't gone through the process won't have.
And I think that 20% is probably about right. There's a lot of stuff I've hidden that people, my team didn't even know existed, that I was just using. I was solving problems as problems were coming up during projects. Yeah,
Yeah. But I guess you couldn't have found that 20% unless you did the whole 80, right? You need
probably.
that space to explore.
And then they're future features now. They're on the roadmap at some point. They'll come back. So in my head, I'm rationalizing it's not a waste.
Yeah, I believe you. It'll happen.
The tech debt doesn't exist.
No, 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 no. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. We know that.
So from all that experience, everything that's led you up to what you're doing with ZapCat now, do you want to let everyone know a little bit about what you guys are doing and what you're about?
Yeah, for sure. So ZapCat is a certified social enterprise, and we help Australian households transition to clean energy. That's residential and apartments as well. What we've built is a platform. How do I explain it? It's basically a platform that allows councils, community groups, corporates run transition campaigns at scale. It's got a combination of things like instant estimates, virtual consultations, hand holding through the process, installer vetting. But you can think of it as the unofficial mission of the company is to make it as easy as ordering Uber Eats to get
Okay.
things like solar or to get batteries, holiday heat pumps, air conditioning, or the new clean energy tech that the world's moving towards. And where we started this because I think we came at it from two sides. So I was looking at what major problems there were with the world. Climate's obviously one of them. And I kind of got into this rabbit hole where I realized, wow, like things like solar and batteries and stuff are amazing and they save you money and they reduce emissions. And the AFR's called it financially rational not to do it. And why is it not happening faster, right? So that was point one. And then when I met my co-founder Proshka, she had been trying to do all those things herself: solar, EV charging, induction cooking, and she had been trying unsuccessfully for 5 years, opening and closing Google, and really just comes down to a couple of problems, right? I'll illustrate. When I tried to get a quote for my house for solar, I got 3 quotes. One installer called me 22 times to follow up on the quote he sent. One installer, after 3 calls, I blocked them and they tried again with 3 other numbers with different people. And the third person rushed me through in a conversation in 5 minutes because I think he had a KPI that he needed to finish the conversation in 5 minutes.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I'm not really going to trust these guys here. And then I tried to research everything myself, and I went to like 20 blog articles, etc. And I have an engineering degree. I'm like, okay, cool, but is everyone going to do this? How is this actually essentially? How's it scalable? How is the average person who's really busy, maybe has kids, busy job, how are they going to find the time to navigate this process? So with ZapCat, we're really trying to solve the trust problem, the education problem, and the friction problem, and try to streamline that whole process and make it really scalable.
Okay, so is that through like vetting suppliers and having preferred suppliers and vendors as part of the platform, or is it more providing the education and resources to the consumers?
All of the above. So if you think about what happens, everyone starts at some point on the journey where they're interested maybe in some of these technologies, and they need to go through an education process. They need to get a sense for whether it's worth it. They need to know the basics, maybe not everything, but enough so they feel like they understand it. They need to know who to go to. They need to know what they need themselves. And they need to have someone they trust who can actually do the installation. So we kind of cover all of those points through this process. So we're not really a pure tech startup. I would just, because we're mixing tech, we're mixing physical installations, we're mixing human service in between. So we're probably best described as a tech-enabled local service.
So is the tech the platform and how you manage the delivery of those services?
The tech enables that, yes.
Yeah, that's just the tool.
It's a tool. Tech is always a tool, and I think
Yeah.
a lot of people forget that, right? It's meant to.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, people ask us, "Oh, have you thought about using AI in your platform?" I'm like, "For what? Like, why? Why do we need
Drafting
AI?"
response emails.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably it.
Yeah. So, I'll say the business is kind of this engine that we're building, and tech is one part of that, and we deploy it very selectively in the places where it's got the highest leverage.
Yeah, I think that's what people misunderstand, especially when they're a startup, if they have an idea, is the tech is just the platform to deliver whatever you're trying to deliver, the value and the
Yeah,
outcome. It's not, people aren't paying you to use your software. They're paying you for an outcome. The software is how you're delivering the outcome. You can manage the entire business, if you really wanted to, through manila folders with forms that people are filling out and order sheets and invoices and everything. But having a ticket in a system that can then move statuses and columns just makes it so much easier for the next person to get all the information they need.
yeah,
There's no duplication. Like, that's the level that you have to think of. This is how we're solving a problem, and it's not the tech solution. Yeah, it's something
exactly.
we face all the time when we're talking to clients.
Yeah, I mean, all the customer experiences is, the few touch points they have with you. They don't care if you spend 100 hours in the background manually doing things, right?
No.
And yeah. And if those few touch points are valuable enough for the customer, then you automate those 100 hours, and that's the point of tech.
Yeah, it'd be like Uber Eats. You don't care if there's a person on the other end of the screen receiving your order and then calling up the restaurant for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as the food gets delivered to your door, you don't care how it's happened. So it's enablement of value and an outcome that you have to try and deliver, and then that's where the product market fit and those pivots that we talked about earlier is how quick can you get to what you need to get to be able to deliver the outcome and not spend time or investment in the wrong things, like you mentioned building management software when you didn't need it.
Yeah.
Your focus is get that one customer, get that 10th, get the 100th, get the value. It doesn't matter how you're doing it. I think people will be surprised that, or even if they do know, how many businesses run on Excel and
Yeah.
claim to be a tech business.
Yeah. 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 I mean, they're technically not wrong, but yeah.
They're not, but that's the first thing we say. All right, what's on Excel? Because that's something they can automate if it's
Yeah.
enough value in automating it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah,
And when we got into the space, all we really had was that North Star, right? We knew that there was a macro trend towards adoption of these technologies, and we knew that it was really hard for the average person to access these technologies. What the specific problems were, what the workflow was, how we would solve them, we had no idea. That's where all the experimentation comes in, and the faster we get things out and prove and validate things, as you say, then the faster we kind of converge on a business model that works.
yep, and that's the most important thing. It's got to be a business model that works at the end of the day. You can't be I think it was Snapchat. I think it took them 12 years to start making actual profit.
Yeah,
Although revenue positive, sorry, not even profit, just revenue positive in the first 12
yeah,
years. You got to have a sustainable business, otherwise it's not going to work.
yeah. The era of cheap money is over for sure. That's one factor. But also, I think when you're a new grad, you really get allure. You really feel the allure of the VC treadmill. Raising massive amounts of money, growing really fast, getting all this attention, because that's kind of where you get your validation from. And also, it just feels really exciting, right? And it still does. But I think as you get into for me, as I got into my 30s, and had this need for external validation, what was really important to me was working on something that gave me a bit of purpose, but also, you know, had a non-ridiculous chance of providing some sort of financial support, right? I feel
Yeah.
like that most people would have those criteria, those considerations. And the fact is, if you're starting a startup, that's not going to support a family. You can't.
No.
It might. You can't rely on it to support a family.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad that cash flow positive businesses are back in vogue because we don't really need another Snapchat.
No, we don't. And you
Yeah,
can't also expect to get VC funding and have a $200,000-$300,000 salary. That's not what they're putting money into the business for.
yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Take minimal and try and grow. That's marketing money.
Yeah. Pretty much. I definitely. I'm not against it, right? I just think people don't often think through what it means when they go down the VC route. I want to do another VC funded startup at some point, but
Yep.
that's not my goal with ZapCat at the moment. The goal is build a business with good fundamentals that solves a real problem, um, and is enduring.
And then I think the other thing people don't notice on the VC side is you're no longer working. You're not longer like the boss. You've got the
Yeah.
VCs to answer to. So you're in another interesting position there where you're not an employee. You're a founder or owner, but you also now have someone else to respond to.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
may be
yeah,
10
yeah.
different people that you're constantly responding to. Why aren't you meeting numbers? Where's your KPIs are low?
Yeah, it's probably good and bad there because if you're really inexperienced, it's helpful to have that network. Like VCs are great networks, right? It's helpful to
Yeah.
have that feedback source around you. But also, the flip side of that is you think everything they say is true, right? But the fact is VCs
Yeah.
aren't, they don't know your business as well as you do. They're giving general ideas, and depending on who you have investing, those ideas might be really bad. And I think it's really tempting to, when it gets really hard to make the big decisions as a founder, you just listen to someone else. And I would just say not to substitute your own judgment for that of a VC's.
Yeah, yeah. Let them guide you and add some value, at least a sounding board. But then at the end of the day, yeah, the decision's on you as well. So take into account what you think and what you believe as well.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't even say as well. I would go further. I'd say the decision is entirely on you, right? That is
It
what you
is at
signed
the end
up
of the
for.
day, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Well, Jimmy, I'm conscious of the time, so it's been a pleasure chatting to you. We can probably have another 2 or 3 episodes like this and just have a conversation and understand things. If anyone wants to reach out and find out more about yourself, how can they do that?
Yeah, so shameless plug, check out zapcat.com.au. Especially interested in working with local councils and community groups to scale electrification campaigns. Also, if you're just a bit of a nerd for things like VPPs and batteries, I'm trying to learn more about that stuff as well. So feel free to reach out. All right, you can reach out to me, find me LinkedIn or Jimmy at zapcat.com.au.
Awesome. And we'll add all that to the show notes when we release the episode. Once again, Jimmy, it's been a great chat. I think there's a lot of insights we've covered there that probably haven't gotten to this sort of level where you've had a bit of experience in both sides of the coin. So thanks for that.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you.